Bum bum ba-dum bum ba-dum bum bum ba-dum bum bum ba-da-dum bum ba-dum bum ba-dum bum bum ba-dum bum bum. Welcome to Everyday Musicality, the podcast in which we discuss all things related to Gordon's music learning theory and how it can help unlock the inner musician that lives inside of all of us. I'm your host, Heather Shouldice, music educator and faculty member for the Gordon Institute for Music Learning. In this episode, I have a conversation with two special guests and share some more exciting news. Hello and welcome to the Everyday Musicality podcast. I'm super excited for today's episode, which is a guest episode. Before we get into that, just a reminder that this podcast is sponsored by GIA Publications, publisher of my new book called Weaving It All Together, A Practical Guide to Applying Gordon's Music Learning Theory in the Elementary General Music Program. GIA generously donates the giveaway materials, including my book and another brand new book we'll be talking about in today's episode. I'm going to announce the winner of my book and tell you more about the giveaway for that other book at the end of the episode, so be sure to listen all the way to the end. This podcast is also sponsored by the Gordon Institute for Music Learning. If you're interested in music learning theory, there has never been a better time to become a member of GIML. They have lots of exciting things going on, including monthly online hangouts with GIML faculty members and free quarterly webinars for members. So check out www.giml.org for more information on how to join. Finally, I'd like to give a shout out to new patrons of the podcast, Patty Creel and Darla Meek. Thank you so much, Patty and Darla, for your support. If, like Patty and Darla, you would like to help support the podcast, you can donate at www.patreon.com/everydaymusicality. And now, let's get into the episode. So I am thrilled to introduce not one, but two special guests on the podcast, Jill Reese and Jennifer Bailey. These are two amazing MLT practitioners who are both faculty members for the Gordon Institute for Music Learning, and they are just all around wonderful human beings. I'm so excited to have them with us today. Welcome, Jill and Jennifer. Thanks so much for making the time to be on the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Could you each just start out by telling the listeners a little bit about yourself? Who are you and what do you do? Jennifer, do you want to go first?
Sure. Well, my name is Jennifer Bailey, and I am an elementary music teacher in Farmington Public Schools, which is in Farmington, Michigan. I am beginning my 26th year in elementary music, and which seems a little crazy to say, but I'm excited about this year. And I also love to blog and create resources for music teachers, especially for teachers who use music learning theory as the foundation of their practice.
Awesome. And I just have to share with the listeners that I give you a lot of credit for all of my growth as a teacher, because you were the one that helped me get a job in the Farmington Public Schools. And I feel like that's where I really got my sea legs in terms of my teaching. So that was a great 6 years of getting to work together.
For sure.
And how about Jill?
I am an associate professor of music education at SUNY Fredonia. That's near Buffalo in New York. And I teach general music methods, early childhood music pedagogy, vernacular musicianship. That's new. I'm really excited about that. And research methods. And boy, I've taught any class that we have here. I've taught it at least once. But I just love working with these students. And I taught in Michigan for a little while, starting in 2001. And yeah, I just, that's me. I do a little bit of ukulele stuff. I have a YouTube channel, Dr. Jill Reese, that has ukulele play-alongs that I used with my adult community group. I just love the idea of people making music together and doing it in an environment where they just have fun and enjoy themselves and are one in community. So that's why I enjoy music. So that's me.
Excellent. I'll have to remember to link to your YouTube channel in the show notes. I can vouch it is fabulous. I've used some of your play-alongs in my Music for the Classroom Teacher course.
I'm just glad it's helpful. That's what it's there for.
So, the next question I like to ask every guest that I have on the podcast, and that is, how and when did you discover music learning theory? How about Jill? Would you go first this time? How did you discover music learning theory?
I think each of us puts a little bit of our story in the book. But yeah, I was attracted to elementary genre music in general, if that's not too redundant. After observing sort of an org-based class, I'm a percussionist, and for me, that was like so cool. Like, man, I didn't have elementary genre music when I was little, and so I didn't even know what that was. I went to a Catholic school where we went to mass, and that was our music. But so I changed my major from performance. This is after my freshman year, from performance to music ed. And that's when I ran into Cindy Taggart. I was just lucky enough to be a music major at Michigan State University. Total kismet. I mean, it was just, in my mind, random. But I took classes from Cindy. I observed her teaching early childhood, and I began assisting and teaching in the early childhood classes. And I was just blown away with the musicianship of the teachers and the children. And I was lucky enough to have Diane Lang as one of the PhD students at Michigan State when I was an undergrad, and Suzanne Burton, and so many more that were just wonderful. And so I was also really impressed by the improvisation, the different tonalities and meters were just so compelling to me. So I adored it. So I think during my undergraduate, this may be the same for all of you, but during undergrad, I took a level 1 with Cindy and Ed Gordon. And I just loved all the jokes that he wasn't supposed to tell, that he told, that we can't tell anymore, so I won't tell them. And all the stories that he would tell, like that his clothes were labeled by his wife, and so he knew what to wear on which days. And that his shoes weren't like, these are the shoes I'm not supposed to wear, but I'm going to wear them, like that sort of thing. So it was fun to get to know Cindy and Dr. Gordon, and in that context, but also the people that I was in with the classes, the practicing teachers, because I was just an undergrad. So that's where I first was introduced to music learning theory. And it's like a bug being bit by the bug. And like everybody else, it changed my life. It's just such a cliche to say that, but it did. It changed my life as a musician and a teacher, a learner. That's my story.
Excellent. Thanks, Jill, for sharing. How about you, Jen? How did you discover music learning theory?
Sort of a similar story in that I was at Michigan State University. I was doing my undergraduate program, but at the time that I started my degree program, it preceded Cindy's time there. And I had really tried to be a music ed major. But at that time, it was really tracked that if you were a vocalist, you were going to become a choir elementary person. And if you were an instrumentalist, you were going to become a band or orchestra teacher. And I took an intro to music ed course, and I remember going out and doing field work and observing classrooms. And at the time, I didn't know what I was looking for, but when I would go out and do that field work, I knew what I saw wasn't speaking to me. And this is not to slight anybody, but this was really, this is a kind of at the end of that aesthetic education movement where it was about music appreciation and music listening. And so I didn't know how I wanted to teach, but I knew I didn't want to do what I was seeing. And so I kind of gave up on becoming a music ed major because I didn't know how I was going to teach, and I didn't like how I was being pressured to be a band director because that was not what I wanted. So I committed myself to completing my performance degree. And in my junior year, Cindy Taggart came to MSU, and my friends were taking classes with her and raving about all of these experiences in the early childhood music program. And my final semester of my senior year, I needed 3 credits to graduate. And so I took the early childhood music class as an elective, and it rocked my world. Both because I had to read Ed's work and try and make sense of it. And that was back, that's the first edition of those books. And even more so that I got to be on the floor with children and see what incredibly intuitive and musical and creative and smart beings we were from a very young age. And it just made me want to learn more. And so the unfortunate thing is that I was graduating and going to Texas to do a graduate degree in performance. And I delayed it by a semester so that I could stay and observe. I went to every class I could at the community music school and just observed everyone who would let me in their room and teach. I moved down to Houston, Texas, and I taught in an early childhood program down there that was kinder music based, but they were very, very interested in music learning theory and wanting to know more about Gordon's approach. So they were very kind in letting me come in and do a little MLT and then a little kinder music. And 2 weeks before I was supposed to start my my master's program, I decided I couldn't do it. I had to find a way to teach and to learn about music learning theory. So I dropped out of the graduate program and decided I'd take a year and kind of sort it out. And in that year, or in that, I shouldn't say even in that year, but in that week or two that was all taking place, I thought I'll go teach private flute lessons in different districts down there. And I was offered a position on an emergency certificate to teach pre-K, K, and 1 at 2 elementary schools in Spring Branch ISD. And so I took that position. I was hired at 5 o'clock on Friday and started Monday morning. And I had the only training and experience I had was the work that I had done and observed in the early childhood program. And so I taught there for 2 years. I did my teaching certificate at the University of Houston, simultaneous to working full time. And after 2 years, I had the opportunity to meet Beth Bolton at TMEA. And that meeting kind of, set me forth on my real journey into music learning theory, where I really sought out those PDLCs and working with people. And so again, when you talk about Kismet, it was just the stars aligning all at the right place to put me on the path to what my passion and my purpose is.
Yes, me too. I've already shared my story in a previous episode. I'll link to that in the show notes in case anyone's interested in hearing about that. But the same sort of thing where the stars just aligned. I happened to be at Michigan State and took a class with Cindy Taggart, and there we have it. So
it's so interesting to me because I was at Michigan State too. We had those tracked systems as well. And Heather, was it the same for you?
Yep.
So I don't know what you finished your degree in, but I actually took the choral general track as an instrumentalist because I knew, like Jen, I was like, I do not want to teach beginning band. That is like kids with weapons. No, thank you. So then I was stuck with kids with recorders. That's another blog or post or whatever podcast, but and recorders can be amazing things. But that's to say we are so kind of either or, and we look at musicianship in such a myopic way at times, or I think traditionally. And again, with music learning theory, we do have these track systems, but it's more about the musician as opposed to, whatever is that vehicle to express musicianship. So that's like at my university, we're trying to get a general music track now because there are some people who don't want to do choral as choral or don't want to do instrumental as instrumental, and they're just more musicians.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that's actually something I'm going to be working on at my own institution this year, is working on expanding our program so it's not so tracked, because it still is. Well, I wanted to get the two of you on the podcast, not just because you're both fantastic human beings and I highly respect you as professionals, but also because we have some exciting news that prior to this episode I haven't talked about, and that is that the three of us have co-authored a book together, and that is called Q&A for MLT, General Music Perspectives on Music Learning Theory. So that is super exciting. I was wondering if, Jill, because really this book was your idea and you got the ball rolling, I was wondering if you could tell the listeners a little bit about how this book came to be. Maybe, how did you get the idea for this book?
Sure. I mean, So you mentioned that I can talk just a little bit about my other book, but that other book took like 10 years from like beginning of this idea hatching to actually being published, where this book was like 2 years from idea to hatching. And I have to thank the two of you as well, for all of that. But I think maybe what the first thing that I remember that was really obvious was, I think Jen, you had a blog post about doing LSAs, or something like that. And
Yeah.
I just remember thinking like, I'm going to share a little something, or share a little. It was a little bit more than a little something, but it was like, here's another perspective on this. And isn't it great that we can have these different perspectives? And that sort of got me thinking, like, MLT is not black and white. MLT is so, and it's like teaching is collaborative. And so you learn and you apply it based on your context. It's going to look different. I mean, I would say there's as many different ways to apply MLT as there are teachers, but then multiply it by your students too, because we're individualizing instruction. We're trying to be responsive teachers. And so I would say like MLT times the number of teachers, and exponent. I'm not a math person, but it's like exponential, the different ways that it could look. And so I was thinking about how teaching is collaborative. And then what's also important is the ability to ask questions and to consider various perspectives, right? Like during my master's, I learned from one class I took in my master's that I shouldn't ask questions in that class. Because the response was sort of shut down, and I was really curious about something, but it was like the response was like, Jill, you need to keep a more open mind. And I'm like, no, but here I am trying to open my mind, But I just felt so silenced by that, and I really have learned a lot from asking questions and exploring different types of responses. So, and I've learned a lot. So one reason that I asked Jen and Heather to be part of this with me is that I've learned so much from the two of you by working together as faculty members, and having the opportunity to interact with participants, because they'll say like, well, so-and-so said this and you've said this, so what does this really mean? And it's like, yeah, congratulations, everybody is different, like it's not like here's the Bible. And I think sometimes we use these religious sort of terms like I don't know, I was converted, like that sort of thing when it comes to
I'm a
MLT.
Gordon disciple.
Right. And then it's just sort of like welcome to the cult, here's your toaster, like that sort of thing. but it's not like that. But I will say that there isn't like a Bible. And I say to my students, like, it's music learning theory, it isn't music learning law. Right. And that's why we don't really have music learning theory police, because there are no laws to break, essentially. Okay, we'll talk more about that. But one of the reasons I asked the two of you to be partners with me on this is because I've learned so much from you. And that's why we have two different faculty members at levels. And that's why people should take levels with, like, if you took level 1 with these people, you should take level 2 with maybe different people to get another perspective. And or like me, you should take level 2 twice. And the participants are different each time you take a level 2. And so all of these questions and responses, I know the book's called Q&A, but I like to think of it as like questions and responses, because there really isn't an answer. And just like with research, you don't prove anything with, your findings from research. It's just, you learn through it. So that's kind of how the book came to be. Like first the interaction with Jen, and then thinking about how much I've learned from the two of you and from people, practitioners, that make me kind of question, why do I do this? And I think those, like taking the time to ask yourself, like, why do I like MLT? Why does MLT speak to me? Why does it work in my classroom? Sometimes we have these religious experiences with the people who change our lives in these contexts, and we don't actually say, why did that change my life, and what did that open up for me? So I think questions are really important for teachers and for students, and someone once said, the people who ask the questions are the ones you should be listening to, not the people providing the answers. Something like that. I can't remember who said something like that. I'll look it up. But those are the people you should be focused on, are the people asking the questions.
I love
questions
that.
are important. Yeah.
Great. Well, full disclosure for the listeners, I just have to share. You originally approached Jennifer and me about this book, and at first I said no because I was working on finishing my solo book and I didn't think I'd be able to handle it. I was really excited about the idea, but just didn't think the timing was right. And I'm so grateful to you now, Jill, for continuing to nudge us a little and encourage us and say, really, we could make this happen. And I have to thank you for really taking the lead. You definitely earned your status as the the first author. I don't know if listeners are familiar, but with things like books and research articles, when you see the author's names listed in a particular order, usually whoever's name is listed first, that means something. That means that person really took the lead in the project, and Jill definitely did herd me and Jennifer in this project. So thank you so much, Jill, for doing that.
Yeah, I'll say I kind of realized even more fully how much I actually enjoy being the nudger, and trying to, it's in a way like a problem solving. We've got all these contributors too who were practicing teachers, and I learned about setting deadlines and checking in and encouraging and collaborating in that way. That was really, again, really valuable experience, and each one of us brought value to the book. That I mean, if we could have like our names just right on top of each other, but still allow people to see our names, I think that would be great too. But then you would have like the who's on top of the layer, So it's. I think what we should have done is we should have taken all the letters in our names and made a new name out of it. No? Okay. I guess
I've seen people do that when they get married and they don't want to take one person's name.
Right?
They come up with a mishmash.
Right. Anyway, that's silly, but yeah, it was a really great project. I encourage people to, number one, say no when I think it's okay to say no, Heather. But it's also, I think, sometimes good to leap in and take a risk. Leap in, just to take a leap, take a risk, and see what happens. I think something good came out of this collaboration. So yeah, I'm really, and thank you for inviting us to talk about this, because it's been so much fun to look back and say, like you said, I might ask you about what are your favorite chapters. And as I'm looking through, I'm just like, oh, I love this part. And oh, this was really good. So it was nice to reflect on the book and the process, because I think once when you're in something, it's hard to really reflect on it, because you don't have that space. But now that we have a little bit of space from it, it's been nice to come back and think about like, oh yeah, I remember when that idea was developing. So thank you.
Yeah. Like I mentioned, I haven't talked about this book on the podcast previously. So listeners don't even really know what it is unless they've already seen it from the conference or something. So next, Jen, I was wondering if maybe you could just tell the listeners a little bit about how the book is structured, like how we each share our voices together in the book.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I really loved about this is that as we were preparing for this book, Jill put out into a variety of groups, tell us, what are your questions about music learning theory? And what I loved was it wasn't directed specifically to people who knew or practiced music learning theory, but to a variety of groups, so that there were people who used other approaches that could ask questions and be curious. And that way we could address a broad audience in terms of, what were your curiosities? What were the things that you wanted to know? What are things that maybe were misunderstandings, or, whatever it was. So that to me was really neat to see all of the questions. And that helped then it helped guide sort of how we began structuring the book and put the chapters together. My favorite part truly is in every chapter, there's an opportunity for each of us to kind of give our view on the content of that chapter and how we have taught music learning theory in our own ways, or have wrestled with the material, or with the how we've created our own curriculums, I guess is maybe what I want to say. Because as Jill said earlier, not one of us teaches music learning theory the same way. And that's the beauty of it, is it's a framework, it's a theory of how we think children are learning, but how we all apply it and use it in our classrooms can vary. And so that is really lovely. But, you know, again, each chapter addresses a specific topic, and then within each chapter, you have an opportunity to see how we answer questions about different things. And you get to see that there are times when we all agree, and then there are times when we have some very different opinions. And I think that is the fun part, because then you get to see how we wrestle with that content and how we resolve, you know, why we do what we do with our students and for our students.
Totally. And I have to chime in and say that as I was reading through the proofs when, you know, we were getting everything ready for the final push to get it published, I loved the conversational style, where there would be a question and then one of us would give a response and then the other one would chime in and say, I agree with so-and-so and I think this. And I love that conversational style. So for listeners who, you know, maybe you've tried to read some other music learning theory materials that are very thick and dense, I hope you'll enjoy that this style is very different from that. I hope you'll find it engaging and entertaining too.
Well, and I think it shows that music learning theory isn't static in its delivery or approach. Again, that we can all take that theory and make it work for us, while still holding true to the, you know, the basic tenets of music learning theory. So I think that's the thing that I really like about it, is, you know, we go to PDLCs and we learn in the level what to do with our students, and we think that's the only way we can do things. Like we're basically an imitation of the instructors we saw. And what I like about this is that it shows that, listen, there are lots of different ways to use this with our students. And I think that the more we can encourage people to critically think about how they use music learning theory and not just be an imitation of someone that they saw teaching it, which I know is a natural progression of learning anything, but the more we can encourage people to think and be reflective upon their practice and be purposeful about what they do, the better we are as an educator and the better we serve our students.
For sure. Yeah. Just so that the listeners, in case anyone's curious, after we're done here, when I do the episode wrap up, I'll give a quick run through of the table of contents for listeners, just so folks have an idea of the kinds of topics that are in the book and they can get a sense for whether it's something that would help them in their teaching.
It would be really interesting to do like a 10-year anniversary of this book and have it in a way like, for those of us of a certain age, like pop-up video on MTV, where we have like little conversation bubbles that kind of come up like, that's what I thought 10 years ago. However, now that we're talking about, I mean, Ed Gordon just put out like space audiation. He didn't just put out, it's been out for a little while. And so I think ideas about music learning theory will continue to evolve. So it'd be interesting to see like 10 years later, if this is what we still think. Because I believe in the introduction to the book, we say something like, this is how we, like, disclaimer, this is how we feel right now. These are the responses that we would have today and while we're writing this book. And I know some of our responses even changed or were added to through the process of writing the book too, right? So that's part of the editing process in a way that continued, that's part of our evolution of these ideas. But a 10-year later book would be interesting. Where are these contributors now? The practicing teachers who contributed to the book, and then how have their ideas continued to evolve? And then what do we believe now? And what are the ways that our applications have changed in the next 10 years? So that would be an interesting way of extending the book, a 10-year anniversary edition.
Yeah, that's a really cool idea. Also, thank you for mentioning the guest contributors, because we definitely want to give them credit. I will give a shout out to all of them when I read through the table of contents at the end of the episode. But we have some phenomenal teachers from all around the country who contributed to this book, and we are just so grateful to each of them for sharing their expertise. All right. So next, I thought it would be fun for us to talk about each of our favorite parts of the book. Maybe your favorite chapter or your favorite thing to talk about in this book. Anyone want to go first?
I can go first. So I love the chapter on learning sequence activities, and partially because it's something that I'm so committed to in my classroom. And Jill, I love knowing that this kind of sparked from that conversation, because I remember writing that blog post, that initial blog post about how I sequence the tonal pattern LSAs, and feeling really vulnerable at the time, because I knew in saying, like, listen, I don't follow I don't go page by page and follow, the sequence exactly the way it's put forth. I felt like, oh goodness, I'm going to put myself out there for criticism, or I'm going to get kicked off of the faculty. And so that to me, talking about LSAs, and really, more than anything, wanting to progress the conversation about how we can teach more effectively and more efficiently, and how, like, in my mind, the learning sequence activity books, the tonal and rhythm register books, so the only two things that really have not been changed nor edited in any way. The reference handbook has been edited, but the register books has never been edited. And there are so many things that I think that could be, I don't want to say changed, but certainly improved upon. And like, when you think about when Ed was putting all this together in his mind, music and truly, when I think about my contact time when I started teaching 26 years ago versus now is very different. But when Ed talks about the ideal music classroom being 30 minutes 3 times a week or whatever it was, and the reality is that most music educators get to see their kids once a week for 30 to 45 minutes, and if you get more than that, you are considered lucky. When you take all that into consideration, I think there are ways that we can, again, just be more thoughtful about how we practice LSAs, so that we're really giving our students the most nutrient-rich experience in music without sacrificing the skill learning sequence in any way, shape, or form, but also meeting the needs of our students and balancing them against the instructional time that we have. So I love the LSA chapter because that's something that I'm always wanting to kind of move the conversation forward. And I talked about that at the GIML conference as well, because it's just something that I feel really passionate about.
Yeah. By the way, for any listeners who are newer to MLT who might be wondering what the heck it's LSAs, that stands for Learning Sequence Activities. I'll link in the show notes to an earlier episode where I just give a quick introduction to what learning sequence activities are. But yeah, I agree, Jennifer. We need to keep moving LSAs forward. And, honestly, I would love for any folks to author a new book where we look at maybe different pathways that one could take through the different units or that kind of thing.
Project.
I'm game. All right. How about Jill? What was your favorite part of the book?
I really liked all the contributor parts. It's really hard for me to choose one that I love the best. But I love all the contributor chapters because it shows that MLT is going to look different. And I'm a blender. And so ORF brought me into elementary general music. It piqued my interest because I am a percussionist and I'm an instrumentalist, and there's so many beautiful aspects of the whole ORF process, and the idea of singing, moving, creating, all of that is just so beautiful. So as someone who, I have only one level, but I have one level of ORF, I find that it speaks to me to blend, and it spoke to my students. So I really appreciate having a deep foundation or a deeper foundation of MLT. But I loved hearing more about how other people blend ORF and music learning theory. And Leslie Ann Bird and Lisa Heinrich have a great chapter on, or a great section on that. And then also, so Kodai is something I've been really interested in. There's something compelling to me about Kodai and the idea of notation. So like all these approaches, I say to my students, my pre-service teachers that I work with, I say like all of these different approaches give you something. And I think not all of them is complete. And then you have to look at who were these people who created the approaches. Like Gordon was a jazz bassist, so makes a lot of sense that improvisation is huge, and this idea of harmonic structure is huge because he's a jazz bassist. That's a really great perspective to take when it comes to music, right? Orff has, he was a composer, and there's all this creating, and he was also dipping into ethnomusicology and all that, and some really wacky things. If you look more into the history, there's some really crazy stuff, and so that speaks to me as well, that that kind of perspective. And Kodai and this idea of literacy notation, that's everybody's human right to be able to be a literate human being. And literacy, there are so many intersections of literacy when it comes to like, I'm like an artist, like a visual artist. I would love to be literate in a visual art way, but I have not had the chance to explore that. So in a way, I'm illiterate when it comes to visual art. But it's limiting then. So all of these approaches, the idea of blending approaches, I think is really, it speaks to me. So I love those chapters. And then I'll also say the chapter or the section that Casey McFarland wrote about where he examines privilege, his own privilege, aspects of his privilege, and thinks about being more culturally responsive with music learning theory. I think that's a really good perspective too, to kind of take on for that chapter, that portion of the book. And it's just the beginning. And I know music learning theory, or GIML, is working very hard with their inclusion and being culturally responsive, all these ways they're building their own knowledge about this. So I know they're critically examining how they address all of these new challenges. They're not new challenges, but they are newly in our consciousness on a new level, in a way. So I think that that's a really great chapter as well, really great section. And he provides these resources, a list of resources. So if you haven't started your journey, or if you're beginning your journey, or if you have been journeying but you're looking for something new, you might find something new there. And it's my hope that that chapter helps teachers critically reflect on their own personal experiences and the practices in the classroom. Again, so many great parts of this book, right? And that is only one slice of being culturally responsive and inclusive and examining privilege. It's just like a blip. But I think it's good for us to see a model of that, and then for us to apply something similar in our classrooms too. So the contributors, I think, are the best part of this book, but I consider us contributors too. So I think we're all the best part of this book. But so there you go.
Yeah, it really is a fantastic collection of different viewpoints. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Touching back on what you mentioned earlier, Jill, near the beginning of the episode, you mentioned the MLT police, this idea where, people take training in MLT and they learn these rules that they think they have to follow. One of my favorite parts of the book was the chapter all about the rules of MLT and evading the MLT police, which sounds silly, but, like you mentioned, a lot of practitioners think that they have to do things exactly as Gordon said, and they are hesitant to make changes, to make adaptations, to make MLT work for them and their students. And I'm not saying that we should just like willy-nilly do whatever just because it's easier, but if you can wrap your brain around the main tenets of MLT and know why he suggested certain things, then you can really think critically and reflectively and make your own choices. Was someone going to jump in there?
I was just going to say, I feel like I need to apologize about the MLT police, because years ago, I was taking my level 1 with it was at Michigan State, and it was with Dr. Gordon and Cindy Taggart, but I also happened to be taking the course with Butch Marshall. And maybe this was level 2, I can't remember. But anyways, Butch had, he had purposely broken a rule in one of his peer teaching experiences. And that night I went home and created an email account that said MLT Police and sent him a citation. And he came back to class the next morning so offended by the fact that somebody had done that. I had to own up to it, but that's sort of where the whole idea of MLT Police came up, was that he had received this kind of snarky citation of breaking a rule in class, and it's kind of evolved into this whole, joke with all of us about the MLT Police. But
I will say it doesn't surprise me that Butch Marshall is connected with this shenanigans.
yeah.
I will say it's not surprising.
I had never heard that story before. That is fantastic.
No, there still is an AOL account somewhere that's the MLT Police that's connected to me.
You've got mail.
Yeah.
I'm totally impressed that at that point in the development of the internet, you had the technological savvy to create that email account.
Oh my God, Jen is so technologically savvy. She's even with AOL, she was before the curve.
That really dates me to talk about AOL. But
well, that's funny too, because I don't know, Jen, if you remember, my very first time teaching a level as Gimmel faculty was at the University of South Carolina, where we were teaching together. And I remember being so afraid of like owning up to the participants of like the rules that I broke. And I made reference to the MLT Police coming to get me. And I think some people pulled that into the final skit. Like, I think they issued me a citation from the MLT Police.
I love it.
But I just love that chapter where we each kind of own up to, I'm doing air quotes, listeners can't see me, but here's the rule. And then here's how we look at that rule and maybe the ways that we adapt it, tweak it to fit our classrooms. So just as we get to the end of the episode, I thought in helping the listeners feel free to take the liberty to do that, I thought it would be fun for us to just quickly talk through a few of those rules in air quotes and share our perspectives on how we each bend those rules. So the first rule that we share in that chapter 7, is don't use labels at oral. So for listeners who are newer to MLT, the oral skill level is that first level of the skill learning sequence. If you want to hear an overview of that, the skill learning sequence, I talk about that back in episode 9, so I'll link to that in the show notes. But the bottom line is, at that first level, oral, we are not yet using tonal solfege or rhythm syllables. We're not labeling tonality or meter or function or anything like that. That shouldn't happen until the next level, verbal association. At oral, we're just singing and chanting on neutral syllables. So what are each of your thoughts on that rule? To what extent do you follow that rule of not using labels at oral?
The thing I struggle with is that at verbal association, there's so much language or so many labels that are presented to kids that they start to, they mix the terminology, and it's very hard to hold onto things. And the thing that I struggle with at oral is I don't want to name something only to rename it a year later, something different. So I use the term resting tone because it's just easier to call resting tone. I use the term macro beat. We can use steady beat or big beat or little beat, but if the minute I'm using a label, I'm going to have to relabel it something else. So why not just use the correct terminology? So for me, resting tone, macro beat, micro beat are the 3 that I use in terms of terminology at oral versus verbal association. But what I don't do is I don't associate solfege with it. I don't talk about meter and tonality with it, but I have to have, like, we're going to move to a beat. And I would rather just say, let's move to the macro beat and begin to give them just a little touch of that terminology, so that when we get to that next step of, hey, we've been moving to the macro beat and the micro beat, but now we're going to put some things with it. It kind of front loads some of that terminology for kids, but it also avoids trying to rename and have different names for things at different times. I just, today it's the hometown, next week it's the resting tone. Today it's the big beat, next time it's macro beat. I just think it's easier to name it what it is. I just don't go into an explanation or associate other stuff with it at oral.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, terminology. I think there's something called EdTPA out here in the universe. It's another teacher certification test, EdTPA, and they do the test describes something called academic language. And I guess I didn't think about how much academic language I use without really connecting to it or really explaining it. I think I used a lot of academic language that either maybe went over my students' heads in the classroom, or that they eventually figured out what it means. And in a way, that's how we learn language. Like, would you like some cheese? Here's some cheese. And then you figure out what cheese is, because it's that amazing stuff that comes like, oh, who doesn't like cheese?
And it's great with wine.
Great with wine. Again, another topic we can explore. Who doesn't like cheese? Well, I guess you could say vegans or people who are lactose intolerant. However, a lot of people like cheese. So what I'm trying to say is T-Rex, Stegosaurus. Little ones use terms all the time, and through use, they understand what they are, and they're polysyllabic. And so sometimes we discount children. Even the term beat, like Jen, you said, I teach them like macrobeat and microbeat, but I think even we say like, move the beat. I mean, you could just say move with me. Okay, cool. But when you say move the beat, we don't explain the beat is, like we often don't explain, we just say move the beat. And then they realize through experience, oh, that's the beat. Mm-hmm. So I think we do use terms. However, when I think of terms and notation, you were saying like renaming, like teach one term and then another term and another term. Ed Gordon says, like, why do iconic notation, or why do hand signs? Hand signs, iconic notation are just another form of notation. So why not use standard notation when they're ready for standard notation? Like, why teach another form of notation when you're going to have to, use standard notation? I think that's kind of similar in a way to what you were saying about why teach home tone when, so that's sort of like the way that I grapple with using terminology. So I have used resting tone, but I've also used sing this sound. When you see my gesture, take a breath and sing that sound. Bum, bum. Now, are they just thinking bum as the sound, or are they really? So then do I say pitch? But then I have to explain, what does pitch, sing this pitch. So sing this sound. That special sound is called the resting tone. Okay, let's sing resting tone. Like that sort of thing. You're going to say something?
Well, Heather? Speaking of exactly what you just said, I think I tell this story in the book, but like, we all have our times. We look back at things we did earlier and we're like, ugh, that was so lame. Why did I do that? I'm a rule follower, in case the two of you didn't know that already. I'm a rule follower. And so I tried to follow this rule when I first was using music learning theory. And I was like, okay, I cannot call it resting tone, but I got to call it something, kind of like what you were just saying, Jill. Like, okay, sing this. So I was like, okay, I'm going to call it that special pitch. So I called it that special pitch. You're going to sing that special pitch. And then finally I realized I'm going to start the word pitch with a B one of these times, and it's not going to go over well. And this is just silly. Why am I calling it that special pitch? Why don't I just call it resting tone? I'm not explaining what it is. I'm not saying this is the first degree of the scale, and just call it that. Yeah. So I agree with the two of you.
Yeah. And when it comes to like macro beat, I do say, let's move the macro beat. The macro beat is the big beat. And the micro beat is the little beat. That's all I say, because they get the idea of big and little. And I think I do put the term macro beat, and I make it all caps and big, and then micro beat on another sign is smaller. I mean, they're using words all the time. Sometimes I'll put a picture of, I'm trying to pick, okay, so a picture of like a pea pod. And then this is a visual that I use in my book, Navigating Music Learning Theory. And then in the smaller picture, or where I have like microbeat, I have the three little P's that go into it, because you've got 1, and then there is the P with 3 pots, so 3. And if anybody in the classroom is really looking and really analyzing, there you have it. You've got a 1-to-3 ratio, right? For triple meter, for I eat my peas with honey, that sort of thing.
Cute.
Thank you. So, so I do say big beat and little beat, and I try to represent with visuals because I think my students need visual learning supports at times. So where previously I would just have avoided showing these terms, and I guess we might talk later about writing down solfege. I do not write do-da-dee, because at that point, that is, I don't. When it comes to macrobeat and microbeat, I don't write it. I still say macro and microbeat with my big sign and my little sign. But yeah, so I do add terminology, and I do explain a little bit, only in that, like, macro is big, micro is small, like a microscope, if they've at that age used a microscope. So micro means small beat. And I don't say that the microbeat moves faster. This beat's faster, because it's not faster. It's not faster at all. It's shorter in duration, but I don't explain that to them.
Right. But I think this is, go ahead.
It's a common mistake that my undergraduates use, is I'll say, let's do the fast beat. Let's do the slow beat. And I'm like, nope, it's not a fast or slow ratio. That's not the relationship between macro and micro beat. But I mean, I guess to some people, that may be the way that they're perceiving it, but I think that is a limitation of their audiation. Does that make sense? To see it not as like ratio, but as in different tempi.
Yeah, I think it's also a good example of how, if we feel like we need to explain things when we're introducing these terms, sometimes it's easy to over-explain and either talk, vomit words at kids when they're not ready for it, and then we lose them, or we may say things that are actually not true. Sort of like teaching notation, right? Like, from a traditional standpoint, we try to introduce notation right away. So we have to, in order to teach it, we have to revert to these like
quarter note equals 1 beat.
like a quarter note gets 1 beat. Exactly.
But it doesn't. Yeah. And I say to my students, don't lie to your students. And there's so many things that aren't necessarily lies, but they're not truths.
There is actually a book, I thought I had it here, but you might have heard of the book, Lies My Teacher Told Me, all about the social studies curriculum in America. Somebody kind of made a play off that, and it's Lies My Music Teacher Told Me. Nice. I can't remember the name of the author, but I'll try to link to it in the show notes. But it's somebody that, as far as I know, is totally not music learning theory connected, but so much of what this person talks about is, things that we talk about in music learning theory, like how that's a lie that a quarter note gets 1 beat.
Yeah, I mean, we could have just transcribed this conversation and published it, and that could be our Q&A book. But I think people...
And I'm sitting here with like more questions, because have you ever had children ask you, like, what is a macro beat? And my explanation, like, well, that's the big beat, but what does that mean? And so what I began telling my students is the macro beat is what establishes the tempo of the song, and the micro beat is what establishes the meter of the song. And the microbeat is related to the macrobeat. But so my brain is already going off in different ways. Yeah. So
but I love that what you just said, Jen, is something that I think in some of Gordon's books he spends paragraphs talking about, but you just said it so beautifully and simply.
Yeah, and that's how I explain it to kids. I'm like, the macrobeat is what establishes the tempo. That's what determines how fast or slow the music goes. But when you listen to that macrobeat, there are microbeats included, and that's what's going to tell you what the meter is. And so without that macrobeat, you won't know what meter your song's in, or your chant's in, or whatever. And so that's how I began explaining it. But I always began, am I breaking an MLT rule?
They asked you. They asked you, right? So, and if they're ready for that, they'll understand what you just said. And if they're not, they are on to the next thing.
Yeah.
I think sometimes the explanations are more for us than they are for them. So I think when a teacher explains without being asked, I think that is an explanation for the teacher.
Yeah.
But when the students ask, like your students ask, somebody's ready for that, or they're not, and not a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Well, we're already running a bit long here, so how about we just do one more quickie, a rule that we, whether we break it or not, and that is the rule that tonal solfege and rhythm syllables should not be read or written. They should only be sung, chanted, or audiated. We shouldn't be writing out solfege for our students. To what extent do each of you follow that rule of not reading and writing solfege?
I don't.
Me neither.
Go ahead, Jill.
Well, what I was going to say is I don't write syllables in relation to patterns, but in relation to harmonic function, I will write the syllables. So, because it's more of a connection to the label as opposed to the audiation. So if you're writing syllables, like here's the pattern, whether it's to reinforce notation, if you're writing them at the symbolic association stage or the verbal association stage, if you're writing syllables for each pattern or for patterns, I think that you're doing that in place of audiation. Okay, so however, my students, like we were just saying earlier, gosh, at the verbal association level, there are so many labels and so many new syllables and things like that. So what I do is I just have a tonic and dominant that I put magnetized up there. And then when it's the major tonic stuff, I have a do, mi, and a sol up there. And for the dominant, I have a sol, fa, re, and ti, just so that they know and that's all it is about. And that's only for that one part of that page. And so they know that syllable goes with, that term goes with that.
Yeah, and I will say that I don't write out patterns. I don't write out patterns with solfege, but I do have a very large ELL population in my building, and many of those families filter in and out of our program throughout the year. And so when I have students that come to me in third grade and there's very little English and they're trying to grapple with every direction I'm giving, plus audiation skills, plus keeping up with all of the solfege and things like that, sometimes just having the visual of what I'm saying, I find, like, again, it's not every pattern, but if I'm talking about meter and the macrobeat is do and the microbeat is do da di, I might put that up there visually just so that they have something to reference as we're chanting and progressing through work. But no, I don't use solfege I don't write out syllables for every pattern, but I do put tools in place to assist the students who are, coming to us later and just need a little remediation or a little step later up into this process of learning.
Yeah, similarly for me too. It's to help reinforce the new terminology. And just like what Jill said, if it ever becomes a crutch for audiation, then to me, that's a no-no. Yeah. Like, for example, some people in talking about beginning instrumental music, whether that's, band or recorder, they want to start the kids by ear, not with traditional notation, which is fantastic. But then they'll give the students a whole song written out with solfege. And then the students just end up pushing the buttons that go with the solfege syllables that are written down. So it becomes another form of notation and a crutch for what they lack in audiation. So yeah, I agree. So I hope that was helpful for the listeners to just hear a little bit how each of us take these rules in air quotes and tweak them just a little bit, but yet staying true to these core ideas of music learning theory behind the rules. So if that's of interest to you, you can check more of that out in the book. All right, we need to wrap things up here. I want to make sure that the listeners are aware of all the other fantastic, well, not all the fantastic work that you're each doing, because there's a lot of it, but just some of the highlights. Jen, you have a fabulous blog and a Teachers Pay Teachers store. Could you just share a little with our listeners about where they can check that out?
Yeah, so I have a blog that I share lots of ideas about not only music learning theory, but elementary general music in general. That's redundant. And you can find that at singtokids.com. And there you'll see links to my Teachers Pay Teachers store, which has many MLT-based resources for people who use music learning theory as their foundation of learning, as well as other things. I also have a YouTube channel that's linked there as well, where you can see an MLT approach to teaching, if you're looking for that model or some inspiration or a different way of doing things, that's available for you as well.
And your YouTube handle is Sing to Kids.
Everything I do on social media is Sing to Kids, because that's what I do all day. Maybe not this fall, but
yeah, so folks can check you out on, you have a Facebook page as well, Sing to Kids.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. Yeah. And then Jill, I know you already mentioned your fantastic YouTube channel. Well, you didn't call it fantastic because you're humble, but I call it fantastic. But you also have your solo book that you've briefly mentioned that's fairly new. Could you tell the listeners a little bit about that? What's it called and what's it about?
Sure. It's called Navigating Music Learning Theory, a guide for general music teachers. And it emerged from these materials that I use in the level classes and I use in my methods classes. There are explanations about the skill learning sequence, which is so important, so important. And it's at the core of all my decisions for LSAs and classroom activities. So there's a section on that. There's a section on learning sequence activities if you're interested in learning more about how to do them and some efficient directions for doing them. I have those there because I found the reference handbook for the learning sequence activities is great, but it's just like so difficult to wade through. So you should definitely have that resource, but this is just sort of a quick guide. And then I've got a classroom activity section, and I try to focus on how to embed that whole part whole sort of teaching approach within each activity, because I found that my students needed that. I either did like a whole part where I did like an activity and then I had students singing patterns. I went back to the activity and all that, but I didn't feel like they really understood. I didn't do the last whole of whole part whole, I felt. But then there are some times where I did whole and didn't do the part, but then I did the whole. So I found that when I was a little bit more intentional about that whole part whole process within activities, it worked better for my students. And the book has assessments, an example curriculum guide, a choose your own adventure guide to the skill learning sequence, because I'm an 80s kid and that made sense for me. Like if your students are doing well at this, move on to page 36 where your students can do, or if your students are struggling, go back to this page, sort of thing. And no one dies. There's no point where you turn to a page, it's like, dun, 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 you died. No one dies in this choose your own adventure book, which is different. There are charts for tracking LSAs, and so I hope it's a useful guide for teachers. It was definitely fun to write, but took me about 10 years from conception to inception, whatever that is.
Great. Well, I will link to that. I will link to your YouTube channel. I will link to all of Jen's resources, and hopefully the listeners can check all of that out.
Hey, Jen and Heather.
Yeah.
We've been talking a little about rules and things like that. And I know we teach levels together. Usually I'm the one who teaches the theory part of it, the music learning theory part, when I teach with the two of you, and y'all get the fun part of being like the classroom application stuff. So do you think that contributes to, I know I follow rules, and I know Heather claims that she's a rule follower, that's part of her identity. But do you think people think of me as like a real by the book? I think they do, because I'm the one that has to teach the rules in the theory section. What do you think?
I think of you as a surface rule follower with a subversive undercurrent.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right.
You show the respect for the rules, but then you also know how to, sneakily subvert the rules.
I would like to know, I mean, anybody who listens to this podcast, feel free to comment below or comment wherever you'd like to comment about if you've done levels with us, who comes off as like the taskmaster rule follower and who comes off as like the rule breaker, fun parent. I think I'm the good cop, bad cop. I think I'm like bad cop and y'all are good cop when we teach together. I don't know. Anyway.
Y'all couldn't see Jennifer raising her hands in the air for the bad cop, good cop. She was waving them all around.
The MLT police has got to have a good cop, bad cop, right?
That's right.
Oh, it's always fun to talk to the two.
Funny.
Well, this
Oh
has been
no.
so much fun. I'm so grateful to the two of you for taking time out of your one of your last days of freedom for the summer. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise, and thank you for all you do for MLT and the greater music education community.
You too, Heather.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Jill and Jennifer for being on the podcast. We're so excited to share this book with you, and stay tuned because we are already starting to plot our next project. Again, this book is called Q&A for MLT, General Music Perspectives on Music Learning Theory. Really quickly, I'll give you a walkthrough of the contents of the book, just like I mentioned I would, so that you can gauge whether this seems like a helpful resource for you. The first section of the book, we give an introduction where we talk about the purpose of the book and who we are. Chapter 1 is MLT in Elementary General Music. What is music learning theory? In this chapter, we talk about the core tenets of music learning theory and why they're important. Chapter 2 is called Jumping Right In, Developing Musical Skills and Pedagogical Content Knowledge to Use MLT. In this chapter, we give advice for teachers on things like building your own repertoire of tunes to use in your classroom, building your own musicianship skills in terms of harmony, and being able to audiate harmonic progressions and improvise over them. We give tips for building your tonal and rhythm pattern vocabulary and your fluency with tonal, solfege, and rhythm syllables. We talk about pedagogical skill development, and we share an overview of some resources related to music learning theory in general music contexts. Chapter 3 is the first chapter of the book that features guest contributors. This is playing well with others, blending and coexisting. And in Chapter 3, that's where we talk about melding MLT with other approaches. So we've got Berta Yee, who writes about blending MLT and Kodai, Leslie Ann Bird and Lisa Heinrich, who talk about blending MLT and Orff Schulwerk. Then there's a section where Jill, Jennifer, and I discuss common misconceptions about MLT. And finally, we give suggestions for how to be an ambassador for music learning theory, or in other words, how to be a good citizen, how to have productive and positive relationships with our colleagues of all approaches. Chapter 4 is all about music aptitude and how we can measure music aptitude. So the three of us give a rationale for why we might use aptitude tests in the classroom, what aptitudes to use with your students. We give our practical tips for administering aptitude tests to students based on our years of experience making aptitude testing work in our classrooms. We then talk about how we use aptitude test scores to inform our practice in our classroom. And we talk about whether or to what extent we share aptitude test results with administrators, parents, students, or other teachers. Next, Chapter 5 is all about learning sequence activities. So we give a brief explanation of what LSAs are and how we might communicate that to other folks like our administrators or parents of our students if they wonder what LSAs are. We give a rationale for why LSAs are important. So if you have a colleague who's not convinced of their importance, or maybe if you yourself are not convinced of the importance of LSAs, I think we give a compelling rationale for why they matter. Then the three of us discuss common challenges to teaching LSAs in the classroom. We give our tips for marking, tracking, and using LSA data. And then we get into other nitty-gritty details for teaching LSAs, as well as how you might navigate through the various LSA pages. Next, in Chapter 6, it's called Planning, Engaging, Assessing, and Celebrating. This chapter has a mix of different topics. So first we talk about strategies for short-term planning. So in other words, strategies for coming up with a lesson plan. We give advice for maximizing student engagement, how we can contextualize skills and knowledge through play-based learning, how we assess during classroom activities, strategies for long-term planning like curriculum building, and then how do you continue teaching in a meaningful way when you have a concert or musical to prepare, and finally, ideas for sharing and celebrating students' growth. Next, Chapter 7 is Following and Breaking the Rules, or Evading the MLT Police. So in this chapter, Jill, Jennifer, and I share some rules that we choose to break or bend. We talk about some rules that we choose not to break as well. And that's an interesting section because you'll see there that some of us disagree with others of us. And that's one of the great things about this book is sharing those different perspectives and giving insight into the different decisions that we make in the classroom. Next, Chapter 8 has more guest contributors. This is How Can I Make MLT Work for My Students and Me? Adapting MLT-based instruction for diverse populations. First up, Alice Hamill talks about adapting MLT for students with disabilities. Jess Glazer talks about adapting instruction for students with visual impairments. Amy Surziga talks about adapting MLT-based instruction for English language learners. And finally, Megan Carnevale talks about adapting MLT-based instruction for cultural relevance. And finally, Chapter 9 is called MLT Here, There, and Everywhere. What does MLT teaching and curriculum look like in a variety of learning contexts? Again, we have more guest contributors in this chapter. First, Anna Preston talks about what MLT can look like in a preschool setting. Casey McFarland talks about MLT in an urban setting. Natasha Sigmund talks about what MLT can look like in an elementary choral setting. And Andy Mullen talks about what MLT can look like in a middle school. And then finally, we have a little wrap up, and there are also some appendices that share some different resources from our teaching. And again, I want to give a big thank you to all of our fabulous guest contributors. I think they really strengthen the book and provide so many outstanding insights into how MLT can be applied in the classroom. Now, let's talk giveaways. First, thanks to everyone who entered the giveaway for my book, Weaving It All Together. The winner of that book is Jennifer Murphy. Jennifer, email me your preferred mailing address at everydaymusicality@gmail.com, and I'll get that book out to you right away. Next, I'm happy to announce that we're also giving a copy of the book that Jill, Jennifer, and I co-authored, Q&A for MLT. If you would like to enter to win a copy of that book, you can share the book on social media and tag the Everyday Musicality podcast Facebook page, or email me a screen cap of your post at everydaymusicality@gmail.com. Or if you're not a big social media sharer, you can just send me an email at everydaymusicality@gmail.com with the text, I have questions. I'll announce the winner in the next episode that will go live on September 7th, so get those entries in. In the meantime, if you have questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes, please get in touch. You can email me or send me a voice memo at everydaymusicality@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. Thanks for listening, and let's keep musicking every day.